in May 1994, in a house being renovated in San Marino, California. Everything was going according to plan until they dug up the backyard to install a swimming pool. That was when they discovered human remains buried deep underground. This discovery caused a major shock, because this was an area known as a quiet suburb. The body was buried at a depth of 1.2 meters and wrapped in 3 plastic bags tied together with rope. Initial forensic examinations showed the skeleton belonged to an adult Caucasian male who had suffered severe physical trauma to the head from a blunt object, and the body had been stabbed multiple times, including lacerations that had pierced through the shirt that the victim was wearing when he died. Before the current owner, this house used to belong to Dee Dee Sohis. In the 1980s, Dee Dee lived there with her son John and his wife Linda. Also on this property, there was a man who called himself Christopher Chester, a British baron, who was allowed to live for free in the guest house out back. However, John and Linda did not live with Dee Dee for very long. By February 8, 1985, the couple had decided to leave California for New York to find work, or at least that was one of the stories that was told. Linda even told her biological mother, Susan, that she and John would be going to Connecticut for a few weeks. But after that, no one heard from them again. 2 months later, John and Linda were reported missing. For a long period of time, there was no trace of them. Then one day, Linda's biological mother received a mysterious postcard from Paris. The content inside read, "Mom, I think we need to relearn geography a little, but it's not too bad though. Signed, Linda and John." Later, there were 2 other postcards, also believed to be from Linda, sent. However, Linda's mother insisted that her daughter could not possibly have had to go to France at the time of her disappearance, and she didn't even have a passport. So Linda's family did not believe that these postcards were actually sent by her. Even more strangely, when analyzing the handwriting, experts determined that at least one postcard was indeed written by Linda. John and Linda were not the only ones to disappear. Not long after the couple left, Christopher Chester also disappeared. But unlike the Sohis family, almost no one looked for him. The disappearance of John and Linda Sohis fell into a deadlock for 15 years. Then a decade later, remains were found in the backyard of Dee Dee's old house. According to forensic results confirmed, it was John Sohis. He had not gone missing, but in reality, he had been murdered, although the case was upgraded to a homicide. Not long after that, it fell into a deadlock again. At first glance, everything seemed unrelated, but into 2008, a man named G.P. Clark Rockefeller was wanted after kidnapping his own biological daughter in Boston during his allowed visitation time. After a week of intense manhunt, Rockefeller was caught and faced charges of kidnapping, use of a dangerous weapon, and endangering a minor. But the unwanted attention from the media revealed something else. Familiar, and in fact, he looked exactly like Christopher Chester, the person who had lived in the guest house of the Sohis family back in the 1980s. It was actually the same person, but both of these names were not his real name. He had used many other names like Christopher. His real name was Christian Gerhardt's Reiter, and he was not a British aristocrat at all. Instead, he was actually a German citizen who moved to the US in 1978 at the age of 17. Throughout his life, Christian had constantly lied about his identity and created a series of sophisticated scams. For many years, he had claimed to be an Ivy League graduate, then a Hollywood producer, then a bond broker on Wall Street. He even ran an entire office, including real bond experts, and finally, he impersonated a descendant of the wealthy Rockefeller family. a scam that lasted for 20 years. Christian cheated his way into high society. He lied to get important jobs and even married a wealthy woman and controlled most of her assets. His scams were so sophisticated that, until the moment he kidnapped his own daughter, was he finally exposed. Christian even denied being German. Instead, he claimed that he was the son of Ann Carter, a famous American child actress in the 1940s. However, Ann Carter herself completely denied this claim. After a series of fake identities were exposed, investigators went back to look into the disappearance of his family 20 years prior. It could not just be a coincidence that such a professional con artist had been a tenant at the exact time that John was murdered. Most of the evidence they had at the time was circumstantial. Another serious problem was that the upper and lower jaws found in the backyard were later lost, and the medical examiner's office assumed they might have been cremated by mistake. Despite many obstacles, Christian was still charged with first-degree murder of John Sohis. He denied all allegations. During the investigation, it was discovered that when this man lived with the Sohis family, he told John and Linda that he was a secret agent, that he had arranged a top-secret government mission for John, and this was the reason why they left California. If indeed they had left, the evidence against Christian included testimony from an elderly couple. They said he had tried to sell them a rug with a blood stain the size of a coin when he was living at the Sohis house. Later, Christian admitted that he had burned a rug. This coincided with the neighbors seeing smoke rising from the guest house. Another neighbor said that Christian had borrowed a chainsaw in the spring of 1985. Furthermore, when friends came to visit at that guest house and they asked why the backyard was being dug up, Christian said it was due to plumbing issues. For years after John and Linda disappeared, John's truck was found in Connecticut being offered for sale by Christopher Chester himself. After the couple went missing, Christian seemed to go into hiding. He dyed his hair blonde and grew a beard. However, the defense attorney argued that the person who actually murdered John was Linda, his wife, and because she was still missing, they argued that Linda had murdered her husband and then intentionally disappeared. Evidence brought forward were the postcards from Europe. However, Linda's friends refuted this, asserting that the couple was very happy. The prosecutor argued that it was likely Christian sent those postcards to cover up his actions, making everyone believe the couple was still alive, while also framing Linda in a storage unit he rented in Baltimore. The police found many postcards from different cities around the world. The theory was proposed that Christian might have asked someone in Europe to send the postcards for him. Other theories were also put forward, such as that Linda and Christian were having an affair, and then the two of them murdered John together, or that Christian murdered John out of jealousy. However, a theory the lead investigator considered most plausible was that Christian wanted to trick Dee Dee to take over her valuable house, hoping she would leave it to him. And the only major obstacle was John, Dee Dee's biological son. To get Christian to inherit that property, Dee Dee had to disinherit her son. And indeed, she did just that. After many years of not hearing any news from John, Dee Dee believed that her son had truly abandoned her. She did not leave her assets to Christian, but to a couple named Weatherby, who took care of her at the end of her life. And coincidentally, Christian himself had introduced this young couple to Dee Dee. Later, it was discovered that the other couple had made a deal with Christian that if he introduced them to Dee Dee, who was a woman who was very vulnerable, they would pay him from her inheritance. And indeed, in reality, they paid him $40,000 and promised to pay another $100,000. Although this information seemed extremely important, it was never brought to court, however. Christian was still convicted of first-degree murder of John Sohis, and to this very day, there is still no trace of Linda Sohis.